Starting concentrations of PHCs in groundwater in the vicinity of the permeable reactive barrier at the site were fairly high, up to almost 7,500 micrograms per liter at MW10. An injection of colloidal activated carbon and ORM was completed at the site by another contractor. Mixed results were observed. Groundwater concentrations decreased at some locations but increased at others. So, a second colloidal activated carbon and ORM injection was completed. Once again, groundwater concentrations improved at some locations but increased at others, particularly at MW11, which now had the highest concentration of PHCs ever observed at that location. Additional monitoring showed that this result was not an anomaly. The PHC concentrations in groundwater at MW11 continued to be problematic. Finally, the other contractor completed a chemical oxidant injection event at the site, presumably to destroy the mass of PHCs present. This appeared to be somewhat successful at first. However, ongoing monitoring demonstrated that the treatment was not sustained. Let's increase the scale so we can better see what happened. 6 months later, the PHC concentrations in groundwater in this area of the site were worse than ever. Additional monitoring time was allowed, and after a year since the remedial attempts were completed by the other contractor, groundwater conditions at 4 of the 5 monitoring wells exceeded the remedial objectives. In fact, the PHC concentrations in groundwater at 3 of the locations were worse than had ever before been observed at the site. It was time for a change. Vertex Environmental was subsequently retained to assess what may have contributed to the failure of the first attempt to inject APRB for PHCs at the site by the other contractor. Eventually, a new design was developed, and a trap-and-treat BOSS 200 PRB was injected in the same area of the site by Vertex. Let's see what happened after that. Very quickly, the PHC concentrations in groundwater were observed to decrease, and after approximately 6 months, met the generic regulatory standards at all monitoring locations. A follow-up injection of KB1 was later completed as a contingency to address some residual 1,2-DCA impacts in a localized area of the site. The initial significant decrease in PHC concentrations seen shortly after the BOSS 200 injection event was not a fluke. 9 months later, all results were below the target cleanup standards for the site. Now, after about 4 years since the redesigned PRB was injected at the site by Vertex, the concentrations of PHCs in groundwater still meet the project objectives, and the PRB continues to perform as intended. We've changed the scale on this last slide to show only the groundwater monitoring results since the trap-and-treat BOSS 200 and KB1 injections were completed at the site. All results are still below the cleanup standards, and the injected PRB for PHCs is now functioning as planned.